with a bunch of kids getting ready to take a picture. One of the students, Timm Thaler, is laughing wildly, causing the image to blur. When the principal arrives, the photographer instructs him to stop laughing, but the small child can't stop laughing since his mustache gestures are so hilarious. He makes other students laugh as well with his laughter. As a result, the entire picture is ruined. Timm had just his father to rely on after losing his mother when he was a child. His father works for a construction company and earns a living. Despite the fact that their lives are not easy, Timm always has a bright smile on his face. His best friend is Ida, the daughter of a bakery owner. They enjoy going to the movies together to see comedies on a regular basis. Since she was a toddler, Ida has had a limb limitation. Timm's grin and company, on the other hand, inspire her to be content in her life. Timm's father strives to accommodate all of Timm's needs, despite the fact that they are not affluent. Both are inextricably related. They regularly attend horse racing events because they enjoy both viewing and betting on the horses. The two head home after losing one of their bets, passing by the stately hotel on their way. Timm's father confesses that he used to work at the hotel and promises to take him to a delicious meal there someday. Timm's father brings a stepmother and her 14-year-old son Erwin home one day. Timm's father hopes that now that he has a complete family, he will live a happy life. Timm's luck, however, rapidly runs out. Erwin abuses Timm and burns the item his late mother gave him. The stepmother supports her son after their altercation and demands that Timm apologize to him. Ida inquires about Timm's bruise the next morning, but he dismisses it by telling her he collided with a cupboard. They go to see a movie later. Timm bursts out laughing in the auditorium at every funny scene in the film. When the rest of the audience notices him laughing, they begin to laugh as well. Timm and his father are seen together the next day, watching another horse race, which they win. His father runs into a man wearing black sunglasses after collecting their winnings and tells him to watch his step. Timm appears to be having a good time with his father, completely unaware to the fact that this is his last meeting with him. The funeral of Timm's father, who died while working on the construction site, is depicted in the next scene. His stepmother is unmoved by his death and does not even buy him a decent tombstone. After being humiliated by his stepmother, Timm escapes in tears. When he gets at the racetrack to remember his father, he is surprised to find a 5-cent coin. The same unidentified man who had previously been chastised by his father appears in front of him and informs him that he is one of his father's buddies. He hands Timm a pre-filled slot and urges him to wager on his favorite horse, Westwind. The race is unexpectedly won by Westwind, and Timm makes a tidy profit on his wager. Timm sobs as he collects the funds and decides to buy his father a suitable tombstone. Two con artists immediately encircle him and use a simple magic trick to steal his money. When Baron Lufette, who claimed to be his father's friend, shows him the printouts from his pocket instead of money, Timm realizes what has happened to his money. He gives him another 5 nickels and tells him to meet him at the racetrack at 3 p.m. tomorrow. When Timm is going to leave his house the next morning, his stepmother asks him to bring her some cakes. He dashes to Ida's bakery, where the bakery owner reminds him of his obligation. Timm jokes that he will pay her back by robbing the senator. After some Timm, he arrives at the racetrack and waits for Baron. Because he is tired of waiting, he falls asleep on the bench. Timm's only coin gets stolen while he is sleeping by the same two con artists. Timm has no money left for the bet when Baron arrives, so he tries to buy his laughter by promising him a contract in which he will help him win every bet he lays. Timm is completely unaware of the implications of the contract and signs it without hesitation. As soon as he signs the contract, Timm's grin vanishes, suggesting that his smile has been sold to Baron. Baron enters the office with a chuckle, shocking his coworkers. The two con artists are actually his employees who have been changed into mice to keep an eye on Timm. After winning the first wager, Timm pays off the bakery's debt and also takes Ida to the movies. Despite the fact that the sequences are incredibly amusing, Timm does not chuckle while watching the film. When Ida inquires about the money after the movie, he states solemnly that he robbed the senator. Ida trusts his allegations after seeing his serious face and departs the site. One of the women in the bakery overhears Ida telling her mother about Tim's story later. Tim's story is told to all of her neighbors by the inquisitive woman. By night, word of mouth has spread throughout the community, and everyone is aware of the story. The story is even changed during dissemination. Senator Stassen was violently beaten and robbed by Tim in this version of the story. Erwin discovers the money in his pockets when he returns home, and his stepmother accuses him of dishonoring her name. When Ida's mother arrives at his house and informs his stepmother that no senator has been robbed, she is taken aback. Ida, Tim realizes, is the one who spread the rumor. He also says that he won the racing bet and that he has the receipts. Tim wants to play marbles with his friends afterward, but none of them want to because he always wins and takes their money. His stepmother later takes him and Erwin to the racetrack to see if his guess is correct. Despite the fact that they had won the first 2 bets, they become greedy and put a third bet with all of their money. Tim decides to back Halali, a long-shot horse. Halali, on the other hand, comes in 4th place in the race. Tim's stepmother erupts in wrath and begins berating him for his prediction. Surprisingly, the announcer announces that the first of the 3 horses has been disqualified, and that the genuine winner of the race is Halali. Tim wanders outside the large hotel while his stepmother jumps for joy and goes to collect her earnings. Tim meets Kreshmir, an elderly hotel employee, outside the hotel. He's also the person Tim met before placing his 3rd Tim bet on Halali. He inquires about Tim's betting prowess, but Tim refuses to respond. Instead, Tim inquires about the possibility of working while staying at the hotel. Kreshmir refuses his request, ordering him to go back to his stepmother and make amends. When Tim hears this, he makes a wager with him, predicting that he will get hired at the hotel. Meanwhile, the hotel manager, Yvonne, runs up to Kreshmir and demands that an elevator boy be dispatched. Kreshmir swiftly recommends Tim for the job, and he also gets to stay at the hotel. Tim returns home the next day only to write his stepmother a farewell note. He bumps across Ida on his way back to the hotel, who considers but does not ask him about the cake she cooked for him. Tim also wants to inform Ida about his racetrack victories and new position, as well as interrogate her about the treachery, but the two walk away silently. Ida arrives at her home in tears and weeping. When she discovers Baron inside her house with her mother unconscious, she is taken aback. Baron tries to persuade Ida by telling her that Tim wants to play with her but is hesitant because of her deformed legs. He then makes Ida a proposal. Tim, meantime, pays a visit to the tombstone sculptor, pleading with him to bet with him because his father's grave has a statue. The sculptor is also certain that a statue exists. Tim has gotten everything he needs for his father, and now all he wants is for his father's laughter to return. He goes back to the racetrack in the hopes of finding Baron. Tim, on the other hand, is not allowed to visit the racetrack because he made a huge profit on the wager. Tim is disappointed to learn that the cleaning lady has discovered 2 mice and is planning to kill them when he arrives at the hotel. Tim assumes responsibility for finishing the mice, but instead of doing so, he abandons them. The 2 are transported back to the Baron's office thanks to Tim's efforts. They're also punished for not knowing what's going on with Tim. Tim sits alone, wanting to reclaim his laughing, and reads the contract, discovering that he will return his laughter if he loses any bet. After that, he meets Kreshmir, who tells him about his love interest, Yvonne. Tim bets Kreshmir that Baron will show up at their hotel the next day in order to reclaim his laughter. Baron arrives at the beautiful hotel the next morning. When Tim urges him to reciprocate his laughing, he refuses. The Baron then removes his spectacles and shows Tim his eyes, which he recognizes. Later, Tim wagers with Kreshmir that Ida's bakery will supply the cakes, Bieber. Meanwhile, Tim is approached by a chef who asks him to deliver cakes from one of the best bakeries he can find. Tim dashes to the bakery and runs into Ida, who has Baron's eyes. He then persuades Ida to place a wager with him that Baron will have to restore her eyes to her. Ida grudgingly accepts, and she regains her vision with a blink. Baron, who is giving a speech, is concerned by his vision once his eyes are switched. He immediately puts on his dark spectacles and drives away from the motel. When Tim returns to the hotel, Kreshmir starts to trust in him and gives him a bet to make Yvonne fall in love with him. In the meantime, Tim and Yvonne approach them, and Kreshmir reconsiders his decision. In exchange for his laughing, Tim confesses to Kreshmir that he had signed a contract with Baron to win every bet he lays. When Kreshmir hears Tim's story, he determines to help him regain his laughter and defeat Baron. He then challenges Tim to a bet on whether he will become the richest man on the planet. Suddenly, a bunch of strangers arrive at the hotel and carry him away, claiming that he is the lone heir to the world's richest man, who committed suicide recently. Tim is then led to the residence of the richest guy, where he meets Baron, the dead richest man's twin. Baron returns his laughter to Tim at Tim's request, but only for a few minutes so that the press can photograph him. He then returns the laughter, claiming that the contract is still in effect. Baron begins to explain his nefarious business to him, claiming to be in command of all evil activities throughout the planet. We also discover that if Tim wins the bet, he loses a portion of his soul. In the next scene, Tim's stepmother and Erwin approach him at the Baron's mansion, seeking for a loan after learning of his inheritance. Tim's heart has become icy as a result of this, and he has also lost piece of his soul. He becomes enraged with his stepmother and evicts them from the estate. Tim then requests to meet his friend Ida, but Baron informs him that his new lifestyle will be detrimental to Ida and the old Kreshmir. Tim must therefore never see them again. Baron tries to persuade him to help him run a city as a present. Ida is anxious about Tim after reading news in the media about a charity racing cup named for him. She goes to the Baron's mansion and meets Tim. When Tim sees her, he tells Ida to quit seeking for him because they no longer belong in the same setting. Ida is devastated when she hears this. Later, while Tim and Baron are watching movies together, we learn from the two messengers that Baron assassinated Tim's father. They feel bad for Tim and want to overthrow Baron. Ida pays a visit to Uncle Kreshmir at the big hotel after the Timm Thaler Cup posters have been plastered all over the city, detecting something peculiar about Tim's smile on the poster. When Uncle Kreshmir tells Ida about Tim and Baron's deal, the two decide to help him regain his laughter. The following Sunday, Baron takes Tim to a horse race, followed by Ida and Uncle Kreshmir. When Kreshmir and Ida are assisting Ida on the stage to see Tim, they are apprehended by the two scammers who Tim saved. When they learn that Ida is Tim's friend, they decide to assist him. They bring Tim downstairs to Ida and Uncle Kreshmir, lying to Baron, and Ida asks that Tim make a wager with her that he will not laugh. Tim surprisingly declines to bet, stating that he no longer requires laughter. Meanwhile, Baron detects something unusual and begins searching for Tim. Ida and Kreshmir are still unable to persuade Tim to place a wager. Tim is eventually set free from the shackles of his lost soul as Ida tells a worm joke. He can also remember Ida's worm joke. He removes his spectacles and sees her for the first time. She then extends her hand and invites him to place a wager on whether or not he will laugh. Baron approaches them both at the same time and extends his hand to Tim, urging him to join him home. Tim selects Ida's wager, signifying that friendship and laughter triumph over wealth and power. Tim is finally able to laugh again. They discover Baron as a sickly guy outside as they leave from the backstage area. Before leaving, he turns his two betraying messengers into mice. Tim tells them that he would look after them, and the film comes to a close.